Thank you very much. This is quite impressive. And now we're going to change scale back to, I think, 13 orders of magnitude back to the full human. And talk. I'm happy to talk with you about thoughts about coevolution of internal representation in robotic-assisted surgery. So for those who are not familiar with robotic-assisted surgery, a surgeon teleoperates a pair of robotic manipulators that are inserted in that control instruments inside the body of a patient, and it's very popular these days. Provides many advantages to the surgeon and the patient, but of course there's still challenges and room for research. Now, as I'm thinking about this application with the eyes of embodied intelligence, I'm thinking about robots that put into the picture precision and scaling of movement and actually allowing access into the patient and providing access to information, and the humans contributing arbitrary decision-making in arbitrary scenarios. So some cognitive intelligence, but also superior movement and manipulation performance, so motor intelligence. And in the human-robot physical interaction, we essentially have an extended body from the surgeon into the patient and the access to information, but also the robot could use the motor intelligence of the human. So kind of putting it into more general context, we are looking at essentially teleoperation, and classically teleoperation systems were analyzed by looking only at the channel. So there is a user who's controlling a local controller, there is some channel, some remote control and an environment, but really only the transmission channel has been looked at. And as a result, teleoperation suffered from very conservative constraints on what can be achieved. For example, even force feedback is not possible, is not used today in robotic surgery. And we've been thinking about what can we benefit from, first including the human operator into the analysis. And this is useful because humans can stabilize unstable interactions. So we know that we control our upright standing, or even closer to the relevant application if destabilizing forces are applied by a robotic manipulator, humans change and shape their impedance. So as simple control mechanism as shaping the impedance can help in stabilizing this unstable interaction. So with this thinking, we looked at the stability of interaction with the haptic device, essentially emulating interaction with an viscoelastic object with delay, which is known to be unstable as any closed loop interaction with delayed feedback. But if you analyze this interaction with the classical approach without looking at the user, so in your control architecture, you have the haptic device and the environment and the delay, but the user is just treated as a force input. The stability range, the range of stable pairs of virtual elasticity and the delay is very, very narrow. So you're only stable for pairs of parameters that are in this tiny region close to the origin. But by taking into account even just the impedance, so the body of the user in the form of just adding additional impedance into the story, you already gain a much wider stability region. And even more interesting, you find some range of stiffnesses for which the system is stable for some small delay, then for a bit larger delay becomes unstable, but you can stabilize it by increasing the delay, which is a bit counterintuitive. And here you can see how the simulated responses in time look. So to make the conclusion from this story is that you can benefit a lot from human-centered physical human-robot interaction, but of course you want to include not only the biomechanics, but also the representation capability of the user and their ability to predict what will happen from the environment. But to be able to do that in the case of robotic surgery, we need to be able to take theories that are developed based on very simple tasks, like the one that we study in human sensory motor control, and make them relevant to robotic procedures. And that's what we've been working in the recent few years in the lab. So one example of our result is that we found that the speed curvature torsion power law, which was formulated a few decades ago, actually, for scribbling movements, is relevant for the much more complex movements that are performed in surgery that require interaction with tissue, like in this needle driving tasks, and require control of orientation and much more complex than just scribbling. And you can see that essentially you slow down. Here's your velocity. The more curved and the more different from planarity your movements are. So the fit is nice. Here you can see it in the log-log plot. But what is really important is what you see here on the right, that the parameter of this power law, this exponent of the relation between the speed and the curvature, actually correlates to the skill of the surgeon. So you can quantify something about the state of the surgeon in their progress in the learning of becoming a better surgeon by quantifying this power law. Now, when we're working on extending these theories to tasks that are surgical task, we also find new laws. So an example of this one is an extension of the power law that I just described into the control of orientation. So the relation between angular speed and the angular curvature, which is just the change of the axis of rotation that they perform. And here you can see again these values in the angular speed that correspond to peaks in the change of orientation. Now, we were also curious what else kinematic signatures of human movement can tell us about the surgery. So one example of such studies is our ability to predict camera movement. So in robotic surgery, surgeons manipulate the instruments, and then they also see the environment through the endoscopic camera. And when they need to adjust the view of the camera, what they do is they press a pedal, and they have to now take control with their hands through the joystick that they hold in their hands on the camera. So what we were thinking is, what if we could train a deep neural network to predict based on the movement of the instruments when the camera is about to move? And indeed, we were able to do this with quite impressive accuracy, because it's important to notice here that this network only was aware of the movement. It was not exposed to the video information that the surgeon was looking at. It was not exposed to what kind of procedure they were trying to perform, just the kinematics. Finally, in this line of studies, it's also important to understand what our users can learn, because we can also assess how they progress in the learning process and inform our robot about that. So here are just a few snapshots of studies that we're doing in the lab, where we're exposing participants in experiments to perturbations that are periodic. So they're emulating the movement of organs inside the body, either here on the left side, perturbation that is applied on their hands from the robot that they hold in their hands, or on the right side where we really emulate a beating heart. And eventually, if you continue collecting these different bits of information, you can reach a way of thinking about this physical human-robot interaction as a form of physical human-robot orchestration, a term that we thought about with Fumia last year when I was on sabbatical in his group. So essentially, not only that the user represents the environment and the changes in how the teleoperated system behaves, and not only the robot can but also the robot and the user can communicate between them slowly additional information. For example, from the robotic system, we can provide some training cues or some additional information about the remote side, some visual overlay, some sensory augmentation, and even assistance. And from the surgeon to the robot, we can communicate information about the mechanics, the impedance, the learning state of the user, their skill level, their fatigue level, how confident they are about the actions they are performing. And we can actually adjust how the robot will respond to the actions of the user based on this understanding. So, for example, if you have an experienced surgeon, you can have a fast robot, very responsive to their movement, compared to novice surgeon who will control a slow robot that will not move as fast to make it easier for them. You can incorporate the intent detection, for example, like what we discussed about in the control of the camera, and you can eventually have a situation where parts of the surgery are performed autonomously by the robot because it got a cue from the user that they're willing to let go of the teleoperation control and actually allow the robot to perform the part of the procedure autonomously. And then on the other hand, when the surgeon decides that they want to take over, they will communicate the slow signal of taking over, and essentially the robot and the remote robot and the surgeon will collaborate by these slow information exchanges between them. So that's it for now. I want to thank my group, and I'll be happy to take questions at the end of the session.